receive your questions.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you, Rudi, very much. And I open now the chat for everybody so that everybody can put his or her question. And also I would like to, there's a question from Andrea Kati Nehifor, and she asks, is the German translation of the companion already available right now?
Yes, it is.
And where can you get it?
Klett Verlag.
Okay. And where can you get the English version I see now in the chat?
You can download that from the website of the Council of Europe, free of charge.
Great. Rudi, as you know, I have one favorite question, which I like to ask right now. What is the meaning of compassion within that framework? Because I heard from you, it's the first time that compassion plays a role in language teaching and, you know, acquiring the knowledge of a language really deeply.
Oh, thank you very much for that question. It's actually empathy which is used. Empathy, showing empathy.
Yeah.
And that comes very close to compassion, as you say.
Uh-huh.
Perhaps I should give you two answers to that question. You've realized, if you haven't seen the Common European Framework before, that they use can-do statements. That's meta language using a learner or a speaker of a language can do things. And this actually comes from the medical health services back in the 1970s in the United States. That's where they developed it. When they found out that traditional examinations just didn't get at what was required for someone in medical health. And it's again the medical health sector which moves on in this field, because one of the leading tests in that field, called the Occupational English test, which is actually a very renowned test, and some of the most renowned test theoreticians are among those who originated it. They found that still the test in English for the health service doesn't really cover what people need. And one of the things that they found was expressing empathy with patients. Empathy in this context is seen not primarily as a feature of personality, but as a feature of communicative skills.
Thank you. I'm still working right now on everybody can unmute him or herself.
One more question concerning the companion. Being in the US, where can I get the companion if I cannot get it from Klett?
Well, if you're happy with the English version, as I said, you can download it free of charge from the Council of Europe website.
Okay.
And the German version is still only available as a book from Klett, I think, for 30 euros or so. It will be available as a download in 2 years or so from the Goethe Institute website.
And I would continue with Peter Franklin's question, which came to me. But Peter, you can also send this to everybody so that everybody can see it. But it's so interesting, Rudi, because Peter recently attended an online conference on a Delphi study conducted amongst Western and Eastern experts on the conceptualization of intercultural competence. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions placed by the US and Chinese organizers was this: I can't believe it. Is language a prerequisite of intercultural competence? And the question to you is, Rudi, what do you think of this question in the light of your approach? Yeah.
Perhaps Judith can support me in this. We have been confronted with this very often in the intercultural field. And I've been a member of CETA for almost 20 years now, actually. And I've often heard this similar things said by colleagues in the intercultural field. They usually say language competence and intercultural competence are two things, which is true. But at the same time, it's very hard to imagine for me how you can be interculturally competent without language. And that does not only refer to a foreign language or a lingua franca, it also refers to my own native language, knowing about diverse politeness conventions, knowing about non-confrontational discourse in my own language and having practiced that. That is not possible without language. I've been working internationally for so many years. I've never, ever been in a situation where language didn't play a crucial role. The very opposite is true. I've worked in Poland for some years and actually took part in a 4-year course of Polish at the University of Łódź, just to learn these tiny little bits of sending signals of appreciation and politeness. And I always found, and I'm sure you all have had similar experience, this is always a door opener. So language plays a crucial role, and how we use language plays a crucial role. And we focus very much on English as a lingua franca for that purpose, because it's the #1 language used in intercultural encounters. It's not the only one. German can be a lingua franca, so can French, so can Spanish, of course, many other languages too. It always plays a crucial role in relationship building. And if we don't take that into consideration, we have a very reduced concept of competence, I would say.
Thank you, Rudi. I just see there's from Carmel Keen Davis, more an observation than a question. She says the right language goes a long way, but there are limits. Could you comment on this, Rudi? The limits? Yeah.
I had a freeze. Judith, did you hear it?
No,
Could you answer?
I can repeat because you will hear it right now, yeah? Carmel Keen Davis said, more an observation than a question. The right language goes a long way, but there are limits. And I was, wondering about what could the limits be then, or in your perspective?
Judith, what would you say?
Well, yes, there are limits in choosing the right language. They're your own personal limits. How far can you go, which Rudi referred to, that working with university students, they've often said, oh no, I can't do that. That's sort of pandering to them. I'm German, I want to be direct, for instance. So there are your own limits. And also choosing the right language depends very much on other things, on how tolerant you are, how open-minded. That's also definitely a part of it and is connected with what you called compassion, which I would refer to more as empathy or open-mindedness. And there's also the question of knowledge. I'm not sure if that's what Carmel means, but I would see those as the limits of the language that you use. And interestingly, I mentioned early stages of language where you really need to be able to get your head around various structural and what we call linguistic aspects of the language. The less you know of a language, the more basic your language is, the more you'll be forgiven for breaches of politeness. If the only words you know in a language are yes, no, please, and thank you, that's all you can do. So it will have to be a smile and a nod and things like that. But the higher your level of language is in terms of grammar, vocabulary, and sentence structure and so on, the more likely you are to be criticized for being impolite. And I think many of us will have heard the opinion, it's strange, her English is so good, but she doesn't know how to be polite. Good in one sense, but very bad in another. So I'm not sure if I've digressed too much there, Carmel, or if that relates to what you said at all. But I think it's important to point out that.
Yeah.
Well, I think you did address exactly that, but I was also thinking something along the terms of, because cultures can be very different. Language can bridge the gap between. I'm just thinking one example is a typical example is the British attachment to queuing, and the French complete disregard for queuing. And no matter how well people speak the language, they still can't understand why anyone would skip a queue, even in France. Which I just think it can be very amusing too, of course. But I'm just thinking that language, of course, is our best tool. but there are limits to what it can surmount in some cases.
Yeah. Yeah, it depends how far you're prepared to go to accept, just accept it, however much it irritates you, or whether, you know, you want to talk about it. There are all sorts of things like that. But I know what you mean. It's also the doing. It's what you do, and as well as what you say, that counts.
Yeah, thank you. I have a follow-up question from Peter Franklin. Peter, would you unmute yourself? And then I didn't forget Patrick Boylan, and we will have this question from Patrick afterwards. Yes? So please, Peter.
Thank you very much, Antje. Rudi, I just wanted to come back to your response to my question. Like you, my origins are in foreign language teaching. And so, of course, my response to this question was very similar to yours. I was very surprised that this question could be placed at all. But what I think is important about it is the fact that it points to a certain ethnocentricity of conceptualizations that are obviously vary from different parts of the world. I think the Chinese organizers of the conference were also rather surprised by this question as well. So I think we need to think about the extent to which our conceptualizations, which we use to make to develop the tools that we are using in intercultural communication training, we need to be aware of that. The other point I wanted to make was that for the Chinese participants, a very important part of intercultural competence was what they called the ethical moral aspect. I wonder if you have any comment to make on that.
I'll try. It's a very good question, actually. I think from what I know about it, and I have very little personal experience in that field, is that the binding nature of moral and ethical rules of behavior is much stricter in many ways, traditionally to Confucianist cultures, than, for example, in Western cultures, and I'm speaking mainly of my environment here in Germany and Western Europe. I have a feeling that it is very hard to discuss questions of the binding character of moral values, even on a meta level. My experience doesn't connect with Chinese, but with other cultures where these discussions did come up. My advice to students, and my advice to myself actually, has always been, don't actually voice your own opinion and defend your own opinion in this situation, but point out that in my environment, in my country, there are people who think A, B, C. And I acknowledge there's a difference of perceiving moral obligations to what you might feel as binding in your environment. So I'm not quite sure whether I made my point clear. That, I think, is one of the core points of international clashes, how strictly we adhere to moral regulations of social life in different cultures. And we in the West, for sometimes, believe that we would lead the world and the world would follow us. We are in the course of learning now that this is not necessarily the case, but that we will have to learn much more. I'm not sure whether that is an answer to your question, Peter.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I just put into the chat that reserve is not a bad first best guess.
Yeah.
Being reserved about one's own views.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it depends actually how really strongly you feel about them. You know, it depends a bit on that. I mean, you probably feel less strongly about the rights and wrongs of queuing than about the rights and wrongs of capital punishment, for instance, you know. So but I would say yes, reserve or indirect expression is probably a best first bet.
Great, Judith, thank you. I don't see Patrick Boylan, but I see his question. Is Patrick still with us? Then I would like you to ask, if you put your question, if you pose your question yourself, because I found it an interesting question. I will read it from the chat. Patrick asked, as he said himself, a provocative question. He says, isn't your formula of non-judgmental, metalinguistic, etc. discourse an invitation to encourage waffling, which means talking without saying anything?
Well, I don't want to be polemical, but I would first say yes, yes, yes. Schwafeling is one way. Well, it's small talk. That's the way I understand it. That's part of relationship building, which we Germans traditionally aren't very good at. But relationship building goes along these lines. You find topics of mutual interest. You talk about things and persons who are not in the room. And you find topics that are not controversial. If they tend to be controversial, you avoid them until you get to know each other better. That would be my answer. What would you say, Judith?
Well, it's a pity that Patrick's not here, because I think I know what he means, and we do have material on this as well. When you feel that you need to express something which may not be an extreme high moral standpoint, but on an issue without being judgmental, something that you find, you know, it's what you think maybe, oh, this is really weird, what's going on here, but you don't want to say it like that. So how do you express it? This is rather unusual for me. I mean, I think that's something which is not waffling, if that was the word, Antje. Was it the word that he used, waffling?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. So, you know, to say, well, this situation is a little bit unusual for me, because we don't do this in my context, country, family, or whatever. So to explain possibly your discomfort of being, I don't know, asked to go into a sauna or something initially, which I would say is not waffling, but it's also not saying, oh my God, that's totally weird, how can you do that? Which is, in my view, much too direct, but is also probably grammatically easier to express, or in terms of the structure of the language. So, I mean, Rudi's right on the one hand, that's another situation, small talk, but I think maybe what Patrick means is something slightly different, that you never actually say anything, you just beat about the bush, to use an idiom, all the time.
But it's exactly this type of situation which we use as practice material.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
In embarrassing, irritating situation like that.
Yeah,
you
don't like food, the food that's offered to you, you don't want to eat it because you think it might be, I don't know, something that you don't eat. Yeah, that's somewhere in the middle of customs and moral values, in a sense, you know. It's I don't know how you describe it, but Helen Spencer-Oti has an interesting point, I think, where, Helen, you don't actually say what you think, but talk about politeness theory and psychology. That's in the chat. Or whether it's a continuum, where my question would be, and how do you see it? Just unfair, sorry.
Yeah, no, I personally see it as a continuum.
Yeah.
And you know, in the Carter and Hall book on politeness, they just refer to a moral order. My sense is you have to break that moral order down. They don't break it down at all. It's just a kind of big area, you know. Politeness is moral, and it is not all moral.
That's right. No, I can't really imagine it, you know, it all being a moral order. We have an interesting example where we sometimes talk about cheating in schools, which could be something that's seen very differently. I mean, I'm from England, and people of my age certainly see cheating as immoral, let's say, and we've had that expressed, whereas I know that, for instance, Rudi and maybe even Antje perhaps see it slightly differently. I don't know Antje well enough, but I know that Rudi, having grown up in Germany and gone to school here,
yes, I can confess here
you see it more as a social thing than a moral thing, you know, whereas for me, you know, it makes me go hot and cold, thinking of cheating.
so my own sense is that actually we need a lot more research to explore this sort of, in the new book that I'm doing with Cambridge University Press, we talk of the socio-moral warrant. But I think we need more work on the criteria that people use, actually making those judgments, and different people using slightly different criteria, perhaps. So I think it's an important area for moving forward and gaining better understanding of the sort of relational side of things from a cultural point of view.
Definitely, yeah.
I think that has often been underestimated in intercultural training, politeness, focusing on politeness for establishing or for winning the scene in the first phase of relationship building. That's why this research, among others done by yourself, Helen, is so valuable and so helpful.
I would like to comment on this with a reference also to Patrick Boylan's question. When you reframed, Rudi, the waffling, yeah? When you reframed it as an important part of communication, I was really happy because, I mean, it is a social and moral tool. I would not like to call it a tool, but I have no other word for it right now in this moment, to get through complex, I would call it complex situations. And we as Germans, we are trained by our culture to see this small talk as something non-meaningful, which it is not. I mean, like being here in Greece and speaking Greek a little bit, not good enough, as you said on your, slides, but good enough for talking. I all the time, I really appreciate very much how they make small talk so beautiful, and then it comes to the meaningful part again, yeah?
Right,
And it is always a pleasure to be part of that and to be integrated without being forced to think too much, you know?
But I think maybe this, I don't think small talk is actually waffling.
Yeah.
Because waffling is what you do when I would say anyway, maybe someone will back me up, but my understanding of waffling is when you don't really know what you want to say or how to say it, and you're just going round and round the subject, rather like when you're asked a difficult question, you spend a lot of time saying, well, that's a very interesting question, and repeat the question and say something completely different, whereas small talk has a definite function and maybe even definite rules, which would be worth thinking about.
Yeah.
In different cultures, whether it's there or not, and what small talk actually consists of, which I think is what you mean. So it's not really quite the same as waffling, because you are working towards a goal of establishing a relationship, even if you're just talking about the weather.
Yeah, thank you for this. Yeah, the difference is so important. Yeah.
Waffling is perhaps what you do when your partner won't reply to you. You're desperately trying to get them to respond. So you're waffling up to such a time as you hit on some subject they might talk to you about.
Yeah. That's right. Yes. Yeah, waffling, you might waffle in order to fill a gap where you really don't know what else to say. But yeah. So there probably is, it's probably also a continuum.
Maybe I can add something, from being here, which relates very much to the question of culture, which you posed at the beginning, Rudi. There has been a lot of research on the reasons for longevity here on the Icarian island. And what they found out is it's not the food, it's not that people are working so long, but the proper and maybe most meaningful reason is how they build community. And this is culture. How they build community. I mean, just to give you an example, on Sunday morning, I went out on the platea here, which is the place where people gather, and had a coffee and wanted to pay. And then the people said, you cannot pay because this is commemoration day for somebody who died 4 weeks ago, and nobody is allowed to pay because you are our guest. And I said, but you don't know me. And they looked at me, you know, in awe. And no, I mean, you are here and you belong. And this is a kind of social networking, which then, you know, has other consequences. And I think we are thinking about that not enough if we are not appreciating the meaning and the value of being able to communicate well. Anyway, I'm seeing that we are, you know, getting less and less, and also we are at the end of what we plan to have as a webinar time, like 1.5 hours. Could you comment on this, Rudi and Judith, please?
Yes, thank you very much for the compliment. Not that I had a large part to play in this webinar, but I'm very happy to be a part of this series, even if only a small part. Yes, Ante, do you want to wrap up? I think we are coming to the end of the time before everybody goes and nobody else can, nobody's left to say goodbye to.
From my side, I can only say I'm very grateful that you all participated, and I'm grateful that the techniques went, you know, not so bad.
Yeah.
Well, that's from my side. Thank you for everybody who participated and contributed. It was wonderful to have you here.
Yes, thank you very much. And as always, we do this here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.